I am so excited that you have tuned in for part 2 of Mark Conklin interviewing Kathy Baldock. We have had so many comments about the first half of the interview, which was very heartwarming as Kathy kind of discovers some things that she didn't know about the LGBT world and as her heart was opened up. That leads us to part 2, where she's going to talk about the movie, the documentary that's kind of been talked about all around the world, 1946. And it has kind of an Indiana Jones feel to it because Kathy really gets inspired to go on this pursuit of how did the word homosexual become the word that's used in the Bible? When did that happen? What were they thinking? Is that the right word that they used in the English translation? And what she discovered is mind-blowing, and you're going to love it. And Mark gets to that in a beautiful way. Enjoy, Kathy and Mark.
Welcome back, everybody. Last time you had the opportunity to hear the first part of an interview with Kathy Baldock, award-winning author, deep thinker, and tireless advocate and ally for the LGBTQ plus community, friend of many around the world. Welcome back, Kathy.
Thank you.
Golly, we left off last time. We were in a boiling cauldron, if you will, a crucible, honestly, a crisis of faith where there was so much dissonance that you were sharing. And we ended with a critical decision after going to the Gay Christian Network Conference, experiencing that worship, satisfying some of your curiosity that you could actually be gay and Christian. Then you made a decision. You met someone arguably would have been set for life.
I would have
in
been.
a great relationship, a great life, and pick up the story there because you made a profound decision with no certainty, which for an engineer feels like so counter to everything that's in you. What happened after the conference?
When I look back on it, I think, how did you make such an irresponsible, no hard facts, no solid financial future decision? It even surprises me that I did it, but there was no question in my mind. Well, the next thing that happened was I continued selling technology. I went to network mixers because that's what business people do. And at one of the network mixers, I won this 2-hour session with a business coach that helps you better strategize in your businesses. She was very, very well known in our town. And I went over to her house. It was another snowy day. It was still the winter. And I went to her house for this 2-hour thing. And she asked me all the questions that business coaches do. And she sat down at the table with me and she said, "You are not following your passions." She said, "Wait a minute, I'm hearing all these things going on in you, and you're selling technology? That's not what's going to make you happy. These other things going on in your life are your passion. I don't understand why you're selling technology." And she said, which is another irrational thing. Here is a business coach telling me to quit my job and go follow my passions. And I thought, this is irrational too. And I thought about it for just a few days. I went into my very Christian bosses and said, this thing has been happening in me for years. And I think whatever it means, I'm going to follow it. I don't know what it means, but I'm going to be leaving your employ in X months. And I want you to know it's got nothing to do with that I don't want to work for you, that I don't love you, that I honor you. And they were so taken aback by all of that. And I had some foot surgery I needed to be done. And they so believed in my integrity as a person and what I was saying to them was my truth that they said, go start to do those things we think you're called to do. And we are even going to cover your insurance for the next, I think it was 6 months, so that you can get the medical work done that you needed. So they sent me out with a blessing and health insurance. None of these are rational. And so I started to think about how can I make the biggest impact that I can. And I thought of writing a book. And my market for the book was all my Christian friends that were doubting what I was doing was right. So I had been listening to all their objections for years, and I decided to write a book to their objections. So my market was straight, evangelical, conservative Christians. And so that's why in the book there's even a chapter on AIDS, which I think is one of my best chapters, because it's the origin of AIDS. And I thought it was one thing, and it ended up being another thing. And I wanted to talk about mixed orientation marriages, and I wanted to talk about historical context. So that was my market, and that's not who it ended up being most helpful to. It ended up being most helpful to the LGBTQ Christian community. But all these pieces fell into place. I'm not saying there was this very secure foundation under me. It was filled with holes, but it certainly looked like something was happening in my life.
So as I'm listening to you, you know what's going through my head is I'm saying this is a birthing process, is what it feels like. Okay, we're in the age of Instagram, etc. This is years worth of things, and it's culminating in birthing some things. First among them, you quit your job, right? You start following your passion and Canyon Walker Connections. Now, what's fascinating about Canyon Walker Connections to me is you may be the most prolific reader, thinker, and communicator with those who are not affirming.
Yeah.
You read widely non-affirming literature.
All the time.
Not only that, you actually review it, which is good news for the listeners, because you can save yourself a whole lot of time, a whole lot of reading, volumes of reading, and get the reviews at Canyon Walker Connections. Please don't go to Amazon. You can comment on Amazon because that's another story, but I want to hear the first thing kind of coming out of this is, out of all this dissonance, you start the tenacious study.
So even that I didn't intend to do that. After the first book came out and I was teaching for about a year, I thought, this doesn't feel right to just publish a book and then go around and talking about a book. I'm not my words would have been, I'm not doing anything. I'm not doing anything new. I'm not discovering and doing anything. So I thought, well, what let's start doing is I'll start all these anti-gay books that are coming out, and they wouldn't have been anti-trans. That wouldn't happen till 2015. But these books are coming out. I think what I'll do is I'll go back and I'll read some of the ones from the most, the authors on the other side of this equation that are getting the most bang for their bucks. I can name a few, but the ones that are getting the most speaking engagements, the most podcast engagements. So I thought, well, I'll start reviewing their books. The ones that I know are handed to the parents of gay kids are handed to gay kids. And so I did that, and then it was well received, and I did another one. And by the time I did the third one, they take me about 4 days to do. So I read, I take notes, I dictate the notes, I highlight, I organize, I try to write about them. I never write about I don't attack the author or their story. I go after always it's sloppy theology, really bad history. They're mistelling history. So I did it. And by the time I got to the third one, I thought, I want to do more. And I thought, people are going to see that this is obsessive because no one did it. Like, no one was doing that. And I didn't want to be labeled as obsessive, but I couldn't stop doing it because I realized that what I was doing was really helping people. And then I decided I'm going to do this. And the more books I read and the more reviews I wrote, it got faster and faster because I could see similar threads, but I could also see non-affirming theology change its goalpost constantly. I could see these changes because this isn't working. So let's say this, let's reposition it this way, let's nuance it this way, let's say this, let's change our language. So I could see them changing their goalposts and thinking, so is God changing his goalpost on this constantly? Or are you trying to adapt language? But I just kept doing it, and I got good at it and known for it. And even though I'm writing the next book now, I have 17 books on a stack ready to go when I'm freed from writing this book, because I like doing those reviews and I want to get back to them. And I don't just say, oh, I'll get to it someday. I buy them. I put them on a stack so I don't forget about them. And I do it because gay and trans people are asked to read these books, and they know they can go to my website and see what these books are about. And I'm finding that some of the biggest users of these reviews are parents of gay LGBTQ people, because their friends in their Bible studies, their pastors are saying, read this book, and they'll just say, Kathy, have you written about this book? Of course I have. And they read it, and they say, then they'll go back to their pastor and say, I'll read this book if you'll read this book.
Again, this is Walking the Bridgeless Canyon. Mm-hmm. This came out in 2014. Mm-hmm. Tremendous resource. Where do I go if I'm a listener and I want to get more information? I mentioned Amazon. You can't go to Amazon because...
Well, you can't go for the reviews to Amazon. This is the third time they've taken all my reviews down. And I just haven't had, because I'm focused on the next book, I don't have the bandwidth to go after. But I'm telling you, as soon as the book is out, I'm going to go after reviews again and getting my books reinstated. And why they're getting taken down is people on the other side are saying that I'm not a Christian, I'm anti-Christian, I'm a keyboard jockey, I don't know what I'm talking about, I hate Christianity. And, they have enough power in some publishing worlds to get my reviews taken down, and that's what happened now 3 times.
But you're not censored at your own site.
No,
so if people want to read all of these
They're
reviews,
all there.
Where do they go? What's the
Canyon Walker Connections, and then you just put in book reviews and it'll pop up. And every book that you've been suggested, except for the last 2 years worth. And can you imagine I've collected 17 more books in 2 years?
Amazing.
17 more books.
Yeah. So
stack keeps growing.
Walking the Bridgeless Canyon, it's read worldwide now. As I looked at what you're doing, not just this work, but who you are as an educator and communicator, so much of what you're doing is re-education.
Mm-hmm.
It's not new education, it's re-education, corrective education. One of the most fascinating things to come out of this research actually was the mistranslation that was included in the Revised Standard Version's 1946 publication.
I would very regularly teach 6 to 8 hour time workshops, and I uniquely do it on a timeline. So I do a 20 to 25 foot timeline across a wall, and I talk about culture, I talk about medicine, or what understanding would be about same-sex behavior. And then on another graph, I put either something about the Bible or theology, what the church is saying about this. And I teach and I show people how all these things interact over time. And I would get to this point of 1946, and I would also say what was understood or assumed about homosexuality. And so there's no questioning. There's no, people don't even start to ask the question, why are people doing sex differently, until the middle of the 1800s. So I'm very intentional about showing what is understood about same-sex behavior, because they wouldn't have said they would have said sodomy. And so I cover this period of time, and it's clear that no one really knows anything. Lots of assumptions, lots of correlations to pederasty. They wouldn't have understood it was an attraction. They would have understood it as a preying behavior on other people. And so I would get to 1946, and I would say, this is the first time, and it was the New Testament translation. The full Bible comes out in 1952, but 46. The first time the New Testament comes out, and it's the first time the word homosexual appears in any version of the Bible, in any language, 1 Corinthians 6, 9 through 11. And so I simply would then go back and say, these people that did this translation, I believe it is cultural and ideological and not theological, because I can find nothing in history where anybody theologically is talking about this at all during these periods of time. And these people were born between 1870 and 1917. So I'd go back to my timeline and say, what is understood in this period, and when these men were young men, about, wouldn't have called it sexual orientation, but what was understood about same-sex behavior? Nothing. So I assumed, and I couldn't prove it, that they were making this decision to translate this word from a cultural position of what they understood, not theology. There was no theology. I was teaching this over and over. It was just a very small segment of what I did. And there was a person in 2 of my seminars in Southern California at Oxford. And the first seminar he heard me, it was a long one, 6 hours. He's a financial planner, but he was involved in the youth ministries of his church. He had been a missionary to Japan, trying to hide his sexuality in his late 40s. And so he came away thinking, I wonder if she's right. And then he came to hear me a second time, not too many months later. And by lunchtime, I saw him crying, and I talked to him, and I said, what's touching you? And he said, I think you might be telling the truth. I said, I do tell the truth. I tell the truth. And so he said, so he went away from that and started collecting Bibles to see the history of these translations in actual Bibles. And then the next time I went down to Southern California to teach, he said, since I've seen you, I've been collecting Bibles. And he said, would you like to come back and see my Bible collection? Yes. Forget about my sketches, my etchings. I wanted to see his Bible collection. So when I walked in his house and saw all these old Bibles, I thought, this is my dream man. He's gay, but he's my dream man. And I actually said to him, bring me a bottle of wine and a glass. I'm like, go away. Leave me alone. Yeah. And a few months later, then he called me and he said, those notes, the translation of the 1946 New Testament was done at Yale University under Luther Weigel. Well, I knew that much. And he said, well, I called Yale University, and they are housing all of Luther Weigel's archives. And he didn't even finish the sentence. I knew where he was going. And I said, yeah, I'm going. He was calling to ask me, you want to go look at the notes? So we spent 5 days at Yale University looking for records of the discussion of them coming up to this verse, and I expected to find a discussion. Dr. So-and-so says this, Dr. So-and-so says this. I also expected to find commentary as to the human disgust about same-sex behavior. I expected them to be participating in this conversation that I could read that basically said, those dirty, filthy homosexuals. And that's what I expected to find in the notes. And we went through all the paper archives, and there was nothing there by the end of the second day. And we put in hours. And I was very disappointed that I didn't find anything. And then paper, you could go to the Sterling Library from 10 in the morning till 4:45. And then we would go until 10 o'clock at night into the microfilms, because a lot of the stuff was also microfilm, 22 rolls of microfilm. So we went there at night. So we were there 10 to 10. And on that third day, going through the microfilms, lots of stuff in there, legal documents from the publisher, objections, all kinds of stuff. And I happened to have the roll with some objections on it, letters. The things that people objected to were so, in my mind, petty. Should it be verily, truly, or merrily? And then all of a sudden, I come across, and I had not seen now it's the third day, the word homosexual in any documentation. Sodomite, homosexual, 1 Corinthians 6. I saw no reference to any of that stuff. And I'm slowly letting the microfilms go by, and I come across this letter that at the very top of the page has the word homosexual, and then quoting 1 Corinthians 6:9. And I said, Ed, I think I found something. Didn't scan it, but first time seeing the word homosexual. And a letter is written in 1959. So it's 7 years after the full Bible comes out. But then we brought someone along with us to film us, and that's what's in the documentary 1946, the actual film of us finding the letter for the first time and reading this letter. And I was so excited because this is what I was looking for. It was 7 years after the fact, but I was convinced 2/3 the way down the page the person writing this letter was gay, because I know enough history and I know enough contextual LGBTQ history, surprisingly, that I knew a straight person writing this in 1959 wouldn't have been possible. It just wasn't possible. So I had to make the assumption that this person, I assumed he was gay. So we get through and we read it, and because the letter was so good, Dr. Weigel, the head of the translation team, wrote back, and in that writing back letter, he substantiated why he made this decision. And I, at one point, took 2 weeks to go through that letter, tracing each of his quoted documents, and found so many errors, some really obvious errors to me, because I'm in this, but to someone at the time, they wouldn't have seen these obvious errors. But he was still not doing theology. He was doing kind of linguistics. And at the end of this letter, he says, the first letter, he said, I get you. I think we made a mistake. And so David writes back, he says, well, how about we do this wording? And David writes back and counters it and says, no, it's not about people that are homosexual. This is about rape. So this is about people that, he says, practice homosexual vices, which in that context would have meant rape. We have a different idea of what homosexual vices means today. That's why you have to know where you are in history. And so the head of the translation team says, you're right. He says, I'll save this, your recommendation, and when we go to do a revision of it, I will put it in the file and we'll revisit this. Well, David had written that letter on October 22nd, 1959, and I know from going through the archives that the translation team went through a process of looking at 300 criticisms and objections that they had accumulated over a 7-year period, and they met at Yale University in June of 1959, went through those 300 suggestions, and I have the list of the 300 corrections that they were faced with, and homosexuality is not on the list because nobody had brought it up. And they came to their conclusions by September 1st. They came up with their list. They submitted them to the publisher, Thomas Nelson, and then they came to an agreement on October 1st, 1959, that there would be no more revisions until minimum 10 years later. And David's letter is written October 22nd, 1959. And they couldn't address them. But as soon as they could, in 1969, they deferred the vote a couple of times, but they realized by just 10 years later, because a little bit more is known about homosexuality, Stonewall starting to happen. The biggest thing that could have happened that would have changed people's minds is this work was done in 1937, and you only know that by going in the archives. The biggest coming out movement in the United States was the Second World War, because people were in same-sex environments, people coming home, realizing who they are, settling into communities that would become gay communities, settling into who they are, understanding they're gay. So things start to change after the Second World War, but they're still heavily closeted. But at least people are somewhat having the conversation of who these homosexuals are. So by 1959, when Weigel is challenged, he realizes the assumptions they made in 1937 don't hold anymore. These assumptions that these are predators and pedophiles, those don't hold anymore because they belong in the list of vices and sins and things that will send you to jail. But now it's 22 years later, and he knows that something is wrong. So he says, we'll revisit it. So when they revisit it in 1969, they have the options on the table. David says those who practice homosexual vices. Weigel's suggestion was those who participate in homosexual practices. And they don't use either of them because they know by then it's not about homosexuals. And they do the revision to sexual perverts, which could be code for some people, but heterosexual people can be sexual perverts. And the translation committee votes 7-4 to change it. They change it. The revision comes out in 1971. But by that time, the New American Standard, the Living Bible, and the NIV have all started translation work, and every single one of them, because we've been to all of those archives. NIV are the NIV is at Wheaton. The Living Bible is at Tyndale House, also at Wheaton, but in the office of Kenneth Taylor, who did the book. We went there too. And the NASB is in Southern California in a warehouse, poorly archived. And so all of them use the RSV as their base text. So they duplicated the era, and the Living Bible put the word homosexual in 5 more places. And it put it in 5 more places. That became the preferred book in the evangelical movement. It was the book that was given out at all the Billy Graham rallies. It was the #1 selling Bible in the Christian world until March 2014. And it was in 6 places in the Bible. And there it was, the due penalty of homosexual behavior, and the AIDS crisis hit, and homosexuality becomes politicized, and, you know, all the academics go out the window. My belief is that these archives have been there since 1976. That letter had never been seen, and it had been sitting there since 1976. Someone before me, someone that was seminary trained, Hebrew scholar, Greek scholar, should have asked the question, why did this translation team put the word homosexual in there for the first time ever? Somebody should have asked that question. Somebody should have done that work. And nobody did that work until 2018 when Ed and I did it. Why? Yeah. On either side of this equation, somebody should have asked that question. And so, yeah, we discovered it. And then 11 months later, we found out who the writer of the book was, the letters. He had written it under his first and middle names. I used a friend that can find anybody. She found out that his name was not just David Sheldon as he signed the letter. His name was David Sheldon Fearon. Connected with him August 17th, 2018 on the phone. Called him up. Asked him if he had written a letter 60 years ago. I told him, you know, I'm a researcher. I found your letter in some archives. And he said, yes. And I said, do you have a copy of the letter? No. He was 21. Who had a copy machine? Huh. And he wrote it under his first and middle name because he didn't want Dr. Weigel to say, is this a gay man that wrote this? And then go back to his seminary and get him kicked out of seminary. So he wrote it from a P.O. box, first and middle name, thought it was disguised. And I said, do you have a copy of the responses? No. Have you ever talked to anybody about this letter? No. So then I told him his letter led to the revision in 1971. And he remembers, because by then he was a United Church of Canada pastor. He became a pastor. And he remembers when that revision came out in 1971, and he looked at it and he thought, well, isn't that good? They changed it. And his words to me was, he's the only letter in that archive complaining. No, challenging. And his words were, I thought hundreds, if not thousands of people would have seen this error and written to the translation team. And he was the only one. And if David Sheldon Fearon, born in 1938, had not written that letter to Dr. Luther Weigel on October 22nd, 1959, I would have no evidence that the original man that made the translation admitted to an error. I would have no evidence, and that evidence became enough for me to think about. First thought was I should write an academic paper and get one of my brilliant academic friends to sign up for me so that this gets some traction in the academic world. And then someone else challenged me and said, if you write an academic paper, it will get buried. Why don't you write a book? And I thought, how can I write another book? I've said it all in the first book. And so my intention in the second book is to follow male-female relationships, male-female roles, views of bodies. What is same-sex behavior, procreation, all through history. And the Bible becomes a text in history. So following it from the ancient laws, the Hittite laws, the Middle Assyrian laws, Code of Hammurabi, look at sex laws there, see how they influence the Israelites, see how they influence the Hebrew Bible, see the world that Paul was speaking into, watching the medicine and philosophy of classical Greece impact his world, impact his thinking, impact how he wrote and saw these things, and then the impact of God saying, nobody gets to be abused in my kingdom. They do that out in the Greek kingdom. They do that out in the Roman Empire. But in my kingdom, this is how we treat people. Those verses they're not about sex. They're about the treatment of people. Because for a man to penetrate another man was to demean him, was to treat him like a woman, which was, in the ancient world, the worst thing you could be. So it's not about sex, it's about treatment of people. So then I carry that through early church history, the Middle Ages, Dark Ages. There's a reason they were called that. And then look at it as science starts to come online and the science revolution, Age of Enlightenment. Watch this progress so slowly until questions about sex, having people study sex, the Germans studying sex, us understanding things, all of that getting wiped out by the Nazis, and then coming back. Then we return to Yale in the 1930s, and we say, what did these men know about sexuality? They knew nothing. They made a poor translation based on bad assumptions with zero malice, and that's how it happened.
Kathy, you have given us a doctoral dissertation in just a few minutes. I know that you are an educator and a communicator, and as I said a moment ago, a re-educator. I know that you would typically cover all of this in a 6 to 8 hour seminar. You're available to do that in churches or other organizations that really want to take a deep dive. Again, author of Walking the Bridgeless Canyon, the 1946 error or mistranslation is now a movie.
It's a documentary that will be made more public in January. My book will be early spring, late winter 2024. That'll be called Forging a Sacred Weapon, How the Bible Became Anti-Gay, and that comes from David, the seminarian's commentary, Sheldon Fearon's commentary to Luther Weigel when he said, if you do not correct this error in the RSV, the Bible will be used as a sacred weapon against the most vulnerable in our society. And so that's what I called it. But my intention of this next book is to show people that all of this stigmatization, modern stigmatization, ostracization, exclusion of the gay people has never been the heart of God. This was not a conversation about sexual orientation before. Again, it was about the treatment and dignity of people. And nobody used the RSV as an anti-gay document until the first anti-gay sermons in this country in 1981. No one started using those verses until the middle of the 70s, when it became politicized. And I'm trying to show people through history, it has never been the heart of God. It has been societies, it has been movements, it has been misunderstandings and assumptions about same-sex behavior that has led to this. This has been an intentional political movement, but this exclusion that the Christian church has placed on the LGBTQ community is not God's intent. This is from people, and I'm hoping that as I trace it through history, people can look at this and say, wait a minute, this was never God. And I would say, bingo. This was never God. So I am hoping to give parents the resource to converse back with their pastors, but I'm also hoping that people, LGBTQ people that don't think they can have a relationship with God or walked away because of how the Bible's been misused, can see people misuse the Bible. This is not the core message of what those verses mean. I do stake my life on it, that those verses are not about same-sex relationships in a modern sense today. Emotional, romantic, sexual attractions got nothing to do with it. It's all about treating other people with dignity. So that's my intention with the second one, is to educate and not, I do some theology, but to do contextual history. And I like it and I'm good at it, so I'm going to do it.
Kathy, you are a tireless advocate. Thank you again for correcting errors, mistranslations, and stinking thinking. There's a lot of stinking thinking out there. And I love that your heart has always been to tirelessly reconnect people to God and to the church. So thank you. Thank you for joining us. Again, Kathy Baldock, author of Walking the Bridgeless Canyon. Stay tuned. The documentary, 1946, released in January, and it's already won 22 awards.
And it continues more. It's in Belgium this weekend, and it's up for the next award, audience awards. Audiences love this. Yeah.
Well, congratulations. Thank you so much.
Thank you.